From Sri Lanka's Aragalaya to Pakistan's youth protests, from Hong Kong's democracy movement to the Arab Spring, Gen Z has been at the heart of global uprisings against corruption, economic hardship, and poor governance. Now, Nepal has erupted, with young people leading the charge. The question is, what does this mean for South Asia? And how can the region prepare for the fallout? A regular guest on our show, Executive Director for the Center for Law and Security Studies, Nilanthan Niruthan, is on Kaleidoscope Let's Talk today to discuss the impacts of Nepal's recent unrest on the region. There is a sense of calm right now, but is it an uneasy calm in Nepal?
It's certainly an uneasy calm because they are yet to find out whether they're going down the Sri Lankan path or the Bangladesh path. So in the Sri Lankan path, the people managed to rally together and vote for a stable government with enough votes to actually provide stable governance. While in Bangladesh, even over a year after their revolution, there's still no stability in the field. So if Nepal goes down the Sri Lankan route, this silence will be a long-term silence of ease and stability, but it's far too early for us to call that.
What is the sentiment on the interim Prime Minister and the government appointment?
She has a very strong anti-corruption record, which is a good thing. She also has a strong record of being able to connect with people, which is also a good thing. But ultimately, the problem is that she is not a politician per se, and therefore there might be a lot of people who try to pull the rug from under her while she tries to do good for the country. So that's the major challenge that she's going to face right now.
So, what are the biggest risks for South Asia if Nepal's instability threatens to erupt from time to time?
Thankfully, Nepal is not one of those security or economy guarantors to the rest of the region. But even if we look at the global discourse at the moment, look at all the international headlines, right? Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, is South Asia ripe for revolution? Is South Asia turbulent? So if you're an investor from macro investment from that perspective, this certainly affects the region in a negative way. And it also, I think, creates a sense of unease among the general public, so to speak, in terms of how even they would react if they were pushed beyond a certain level.
Would business and growth in South Asia, for example, tourism or regional trade, for instance, be impacted?
Any kind of political instability, whether it's for a good cause or not, in the short run will impact certain fields like tourism. The hope is that in the long run, this helps the region generate even more wealth when you have accountable governments, when you have leaders who feel answerable to the people. So in the long run, perhaps there will be positive consequences. But in the short run, as you know, any revolution, good or bad, will come with certain disruptions which we just need to accept.
How are India and China responding, and what is this doing to the balance of power in the region?
As India and China try to somewhat patch up a few of their niggling issues, the one country that's exactly between the two becomes unstable, so there are lots of conspiracy theories. The Indian strategic space seems to be seeing this as quite a negative thing because what they feel is that there are external forces destabilizing governments in India's sphere of interest. And China is also seeing this very suspiciously because the government has been a pretty pro-China, the Nepali government has been a pretty pro-China government over the years, and there are organizations like Hami Nepal and so on which have helped organize this, which the Chinese and the Indians seem to feel are funded by the quote-unquote West. So it's interesting that both India and China are more or less on the same page on this.
Do you see ripple effects on regional security, for instance, or counter-terrorism efforts for that matter?
Thankfully, Nepal is insulated enough from the South Asian terrorism bubble for us to be able to say that no matter what happens in Nepal, counter-terrorism efforts and counter-terrorism joint efforts in South Asia will remain more or less the same. But if we were to have a wider understanding of security, and if we were to bring up things like now, if Nepal really does go down the abyss, Now, what kind of refugee problem would that create? What kind of climate cooperation problems would that create? What kind of regional cooperation problems would that create? These are all things we need to take very seriously.
The unrest also sparked off anti-big business sentiment in Nepal. Is this symptomatic of how Gen Z reacts across the region?
No, because I would say Gen Z in Sri Lanka, I would say our revolution had a huge element of hope in it. It was not nihilistic. Whereas the anger in Nepal is very nihilistic in the sense that it's all about I am suffering, I'm hurting, and I want to now make you, the elite, bleed in order for me to kind of vent my frustration. So the deliberate targeting of big businesses, as you pointed out, even though we had that on a small scale here, in general, the ones who protested here, they reined themselves in pretty quickly because they knew that burning the entire country down was not the solution. Whereas in Nepal, and to a certain extent in Bangladesh as well, we see that they were so frustrated and they felt so hopeless that this was almost this was almost a cry for blood as much as it was for change.
When you look at the protests around the world, the recent ones, Gen Z has been driving quite a few of them. Is this a warning sign for not just South Asian countries, but in general to the world that this is where the protests will be driven from?
No doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. And even if we were to, let's say, go back to the 60s, we had this conversation globally where there were anti-Vietnam War protests, the rock and roll movement was just getting off the ground, women's empowerment was just getting off the ground, and there was just this idea that the younger age demographic was really imposing themselves on what the traditional norms of politics and culture and society were. And to a certain extent, I would compare this to that as well, where we've had over the last, it's not just Gen Z, mind you, because this started with the Arab Spring, the Occupy Wall Street movement. So this has been going on for about 15, maybe even 20 years at this point, where younger people now, for whatever reason, well, for technological and cultural reasons, find it much easier to mobilize, find it much easier to coordinate. And the economic situation as well. I mean, look, as you know, 25 years ago, 35, 40 years ago, an average male by the age of 30 or 35, even though life was hard, would be able to get a house, would be able to have 2 kids. Whereas in most parts of the world today, even if you're in your mid-30s, and even if you're doing reasonably well, you cannot afford to have a house, you cannot afford to have children. So there's this huge brewing anger amidst younger people that's just going to get worse and worse.
Are these protests symptomatic of broader frustrations among young people across the region from what you've just said?
This is primarily economic and cultural, where we have an entire age group that does not see the future that their fathers, mothers, grandfathers, grandmothers enjoyed.
We have seen similar protests across the world, so to speak. What lessons can South Asia learn from them?
The best lesson to learn is that ultimately you need a thriving economy for the younger generation to be happy. In all the places that the revolutions have broken out in, you very clearly see that the economic financial prospects of the people who protested, young people, was drastically lower than the economic prospects of their parents or their grandparents. So we need to reverse that situation. We need to enter. South Asia in general is not a region that focuses on economic growth. It's not a region that focuses on generating prosperity, generating wealth. We need to change that. And we need to make sure that the message we send to younger generations is that they can have a prosperous life. Not a life of, these values and these cultures and all that. There's a space for all of that, but they want to be able to afford a house. They want to be able to have a family. You need to make sure that those needs are met.
What can Sri Lanka take away from Nepal's turmoil?
Well, number one, that if the people feel that there's too much of a disconnect between the leaders and the general population, that's a recipe for disaster. Nepal, by the way, has their average age, you might be interested to know, is less than 25. The average age of a Nepali citizen is less than 25, while all their leaders are in their 70s. And that is a recipe for disaster once again. And I think that is the major takeaway from this, that whether they do a good job or not, if there is a 50-year age gap between the average citizen and the average politician, you're just on a roller coaster to calamity.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Do join us, subscribe, and follow us for more.